Richard Rogers was living on Staten Island, very close to the stores where the rubber gloves and the saw were purchased.
Rogers' dark history, his proximity to multiple locations where victims were seen, and the fact that he lives on Staten Island all provide compelling circumstantial evidence.
What type of individual could do a crime like this? And Richard Rogers fit that perfect.
When investigators find out Rogers' profession, they are convinced he is their killer.
He's been working as a nurse for more than 20 years at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan.
He was a surgical nurse, so he knew how to decapitate an individual with the least amount of resistance. In other words, knowing exactly where to saw.
So all this time, the task force is looking for a male nurse that works at St. Vincent's Hospital. Meanwhile, Richard Rogers never worked at St. Vincent's Hospital, and it appears that he lied to Michael Sequeira about where he worked. Investigators obtain Richard Rogers' work records and discovered that for each date of each murder, Richard Rogers was off from work. That was one of my favorite pieces of evidence.
The team comes up with a plan to get Rogers in custody.
They have to be cautious. They don't know what to expect. They have to be ready for any contingency. The police meet Richard Rogers at Mount Sinai Hospital and give him the impression they want to converse with him concerning him being the victim of a credit card fraud. He goes with them willingly, without issue. Just after midnight on May 28, 2001, they tell him they're investigating a homicide of 4 gay men out of New York City. The detectives advised him that there was evidence to trace back to Staten Island. And as well as him being the last person to be seen with Michael Sequeira, he had been sitting with his hands on his knees and his feet on the floor. Once he was confronted, he then changed to a defensive posture. He started sweating. He was acting extremely nervous and worried.
Rogers admits to knowing victim Michael Sequeira. He then asks for a lawyer.
He didn't make any admission in regards to the homicides.
Without a confession, investigators decide to search Rogers' home in hopes of finding evidence that will link him to the murders.
We secured a search warrant for the residence of Richard Rogers. I gotta say, that was probably the neatest, cleanest residence I've been in. He actually vacuumed in rows. You look back on the case, everything was clean. All the cuts were clean, disarticulated. The body was drained of all blood. Things were starting to come together. We found the same shopping bags we found with Thomas Mulcahy's body parts in it. We did come across some sedatives. We did believe that Rogers was giving these sedatives to individuals he brings back to his house, either knock them out or render them to the point where he can, overcome them. We opened up a drawer and we saw some Polaroid pictures in there. As soon as we looked at them, everyone was shocked. In May of 2001, we secured a search warrant for the residence of Richard Rogers. In his bedroom, we opened up a drawer and we saw some photographs. As soon as we looked at them, everyone was in a state of shock because he was taking pictures from his apartment out the window of these construction workers out there with no shirts on. And he actually wrote like what looked like stab wounds with blood, drops of blood on them.
Based on what police have found, the DA charges Rogers with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
We employ him. We think he's doing an honest job. And all of a sudden, this comes up, and it does shock us, to say the least.
It's pretty scary when you find out that there's a surgical nurse that's dismembering people and still working in a hospital in New York all those years.
October 2005. At the Ocean County Justice Complex in Toms River, New Jersey, the trial of Richard Rogers begins. He was looking at multiple life sentences. The task force came to an agreement that The Mulcahy and Marrero cases were the strongest of the cases because of the fingerprint evidence and the similarity in the disposing of the body.
Prosecutors build a case around the killer's distinct mark, Rogers' job as a surgical nurse, and the violent photos found at his home.
When I got up there and they asked, do you see this man that sat next to Michael Sakara? And I pointed him right out. I said, he's right there. And I just kept looking at him like, you sick human being, how could you do this to my friend?
The defense calls no witnesses. Rogers declines to testify on his own behalf.
He never talked. He never confessed.
After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reaches a verdict.
We were all nervous. The jury looked very upset. I think I saw at least one juror crying, and I didn't know what to make of that. And it had me very worried that they thought they had to acquit him. And then we heard them say that the verdict was guilty. Guilty of both murders. Guilty on all counts. All the air went out of me. I was very relieved and very satisfied for the families. It was a very, very emotional moment for everyone.
On January 27, 2006, the New Jersey Superior Court judge requires that Richard Rogers serve all sentences consecutively. Rogers, at 55 years old, will have to serve a minimum of 65 years before he is eligible for parole.